This week's episode of Writer's Routine is brought to you by Ingram Spark, who let you publish like a pro. You have a story, so share it with the world. And you don't need to wait for anyone else to get read now. It's 2025. You can take control. There are no barriers. And you've got all the help you need with Ingram Spark. It lets you explore all the publishing options available to you, from hardcover, paperback, and ebook. It can help you self-publish like a pro. Ingram Spark offers global ebook and print distribution, connecting your stuff to over 45,000 readers, helping you reach libraries, retailers, and online stores too. Now, self-publishing, although accessible, it can be a little bit intimidating if you do it yourself. There is so much to think about. And that's after you've put in all the effort and all the time of actually writing the book. And that's why Ingram Spark has a huge stash of self-publishing guides, courses, and so much more, so you can self-publish like a pro. With Ingram Spark, you can reach millions of readers worldwide with powerful tools for independent writers. You can find out more with the self-publishing book company Ingram Spark. Get started for free at ingramspark.com/learn-more. Also, this week's episode is sponsored by the Quick Book Reviews podcast. If this show takes you behind the scenes of writing books, Quick Book Reviews takes you behind the scenes of what makes the novels brilliant. For the last 6 years, Philippa has been chatting to some of the biggest authors around and discovering their newest work. If you're a reader looking for new book recommendations and you want to get to know your favourite writers, well, this is the perfect podcast for you, with in-depth chats and spoiler-free book reviews. Each episode is in a perfect bite-sized chunk, so it can fit easily into your day. So many big names in recent episodes too. Ones with Janice Hallett, Mark Billingham, Adele Park, Steve Kavanagh, Dan Brown as well. Philippa gets into all the fun questions, finding out what authors like to eat when they're at work, where they want to go on holiday when they're out of work, and you've got all of the gossip about bits of a writer's life that you won't find anywhere else. The Quick Book Reviews podcast is a light-hearted look at authors and what you might love about their new book. You've got 2 new episodes a week too, and you can find them wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Quick Book Reviews podcast. Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week's episode is with Kate Kemp. She's an Aussie living in London. Her debut is The Grapevine. It started out as a manuscript, which won an award and then landed her a publishing deal. You can hear how pressured she feels to make time to write when she's not really feeling it. Also, why she's not bothered about cutting words.
I never feel any sense of sorrow about words that I write that aren't used, because I think it's just part of it that, you know, the seeing what works means trying something, seeing what doesn't work, and that leads you to something that might work.
It's all on the way with Kate Kemp in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. I hope you've enjoyed last week's episode with Sebastian Faulks, one of the biggest names in literary fiction, well, in the world, really. You can watch it fully visualised if you've not as well, over on our YouTube channel. Now, this week's episode is with Kate Kemp. Kate trained as an occupational therapist and psychotherapist and is now a full-time author. Her debut novel is The Grapevine. It started as a manuscript called Warrah Place, which does sound a little bit like Cilla Black looking for a new home, doesn't it? Warrah Place? That's a very specific gag. Anyway, Warrah Place is set in 1970s Australia. The manuscript won the Stylist Prize for Feminist Fiction, and it was then picked up by Phoenix. It's all about a murder in a close-knit neighbourhood, and the rumours that start to spread like wildfire afterwards. We talk about why her bed is so crucial to her work, spreading things out. It lets her visualise everything. Also, You can hear how she edits on the move, why she thinks that's so important to the process, and why you need to be prepared for the disappointments along the way. That's what makes an author. It's all coming up. If you like the sound of the book, you can get a copy for yourself over on our bookshop.org page. That's a really easy way that you can support the show. Find the link in the episode notes or wherever you're listening. And let's get into it then with Kate Kemp, and we start as we always do with what she sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
I write in what is also our spare room. So when we have people come and stay, which we do reasonably often, I need to pack up again, which I don't mind because I especially love having my family from Australia come over and visit. But when it is my writing room, I tend to take up the whole room. I've got quite a long desk. It's about 2 meters long, and I spread out my notes across it. I've got a pretty big monitor. I've got a laptop on a stand. I've got a row of books on the desk. What else? I've got a little teacup that was part of a set for my grandparents' wedding that they got as a gift. I've got a blue glass vase that I put loads of pens and pencils in, and I've got quite a selection of green pens in there because I always edit in green. I've got a candle. I often light a candle. The one I've got at the moment is a gorgeous one that my niece Hannah, my beautiful niece, made. Yeah.
No, there's a lot going on, and you're like me. I feel I'm a spreader too. What is there that's a bit practical and almost pertains to your writing and the story that you're telling? Do we have plot points on the wall or post-it notes or anything like that?
I have on the bed behind me, I have many piles of paper that is that represents where I'm up to in the work that I'm doing on my next novel at the moment. I am very tactile when I'm developing my ideas. I have lots of notebooks that I carry with me. I've got a stack of 4 notebooks next to me that I have on the go at the moment. And when I gather ideas, once I've amassed enough of them, I quite literally cut them out of my notebooks with a pair of scissors and then lay them all out over the bed and start moving them around and seeing what kinds of connections form, what ideas sit well together that have a good fit. I look at repositioning ideas so that sometimes if you nudge the edges up against each other, there's a little bit of friction and it might spark something new. At that point, I realize that there are loads of ideas that had no business being there in the first place, so they get discarded, but they're part of the process. And that then creates a whole new round of writing notes and sort of solidifying the level of substance that a story has. So the bed is very much part of my workspace.
I've chatted to many authors doing this, and I'm always amazed at the different processes of getting to a story stage. But writing in a notebook and chopping out your ideas and spreading them around the bed is something new to me. How have you fallen into this way of doing something? Did it just feel the most natural path for you to take? Have you read that someone else has done it?
No, I don't know of anyone else that does it. I think it just really felt like something that I needed to do next because I have other responsibilities, things to do. My day tends to not look the same each day. So most of my ideas gathering is not done at a desk. It's done while I'm out and about. So, I have these notes and, you get to the point of inevitability that there is enough there that is strong enough to hold different aspects of a story. And by that point, I've amassed so much that it could potentially be overwhelming. to go through it. So I feel like I need to reorganize it, to find some kind of structure. And that, to me, was the only way that I could think of to do it. I think it is quite cumbersome. It's quite laborious. I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone, but it did work for me for my first book, and I'm doing it again for the second book because, I'm open to trying new things, but I think this is something that does work for me.
Yeah, well, they say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, that's interesting that you're open to trying new stuff. As you get your second novel down, how consciously are you thinking of ways that maybe you can slightly tweak what it is you do, where it is you work, how maybe you can make it all a bit more streamlined? I don't know, does that factor into your thoughts much?
To a certain extent, and I think I have a bit of a better idea now about what makes a story work in terms of narrative arc and, creating that cause and effect and tension that, you need to keep a plot going in a way that is engaging. Whereas I think the first time around, I was meandering around all over the place, just following, whatever held my interest or something that I was curious about exploring. I think, I'm very much keen on characterization, on relationships and, relational dynamics. But I really needed to learn about the crafting of a story and how it holds together, and I think I'm a bit better at that this time around. That perhaps there are aspects that I'm more able to quickly say no, it's just not a part of this story.
Are you learning that through conversations with your editors and with your agents? Is there anything else that's factoring in?
I've learned so much from them. It's been an absolute wonder to have access to their experience and expertise, and I think just doing it. I'm a great believer that you don't know what works until you have a go and see what happens. That no matter how many books on craft you read, or reading other books that really speak to you helps. But there is nothing for it other than just have a go and see what happens. So the more I do that, the more I learn. And I think, there are still things that I do that don't work, but that's okay. I never feel any sense of sorrow about words that I write that aren't used, because I think it's just part of it that, they're seeing what works means trying something, seeing what doesn't work, and that leads you to something that might work better. And also, I think, my first career was as an occupational therapist, and I trained for 4 years at university to become an OT, and then I trained for another 4 years to become a systemic psychotherapist after that. And, not for a single moment did I think that I would be able to have a career as a writer without putting in the hours of training. So, it's different in that you don't get to the end and say, well, I've got a qualification, I can, go off and look for a job. But I think it's the same process in my mind, that there is training to be done, that I've got to learn the craft. I've got to find out what works for me. I've got to find out how, of all the ways that are available to me, what's the best way to express the ideas that matter most to me. So yeah, I everything that I write that doesn't make the cut either, teaches me more about the characters that are on the page, or have taught me something about the craft or the process of writing. On a school day, my alarm goes off at 6 o'clock. And I'm finding now, even if it's not a school day, my alarm isn't on. That tends to be when I wake up anyway, and I quite like there being a long expanse of a day ahead of me. The room I'm in has a window that has a really good view of the sunrise, and I quite like being in here when that happens. I find it quite tricky to settle down to writing first thing in the morning. And I have finally grudgingly accepted that if I do some exercise first thing in the morning, that actually I feel strong and more clear-headed, and that if I don't do it, I feel sluggish. So I usually do a bit of yoga or Pilates, or maybe have a go on the rowing machine that we've got downstairs. Um, I tend to try and get any admin type tasks done first thing, because again, I find it hard to settle if there are things hanging over my head that I need to attend to. So I'll do any emails that I need to. I might do some engagement on social media if I need to do that, and then sort of the actual writing depends on a few things. It depends on what kind of time I've got available to me on that particular day. And it depends on what part of the process I'm up to. So it might be arranging notes, rearranging, sort of making plans for chapters. I do tend to plan out each chapter when I get to a certain section. I look at what notes I've got and see how they might hang together. And I do come up with a plan that is not incredibly dissimilar to say writing nonfiction and having an essay plan. So I plot through the things that I want to have happen in that chapter, in terms of the content, and I think about what kind of tone I'm going for. So not just what I want the reader to know, but how I want them to feel. I think about what kind of contextual elements I want to include in that chapter to give extra meaning to the events. And I think about what dynamics I want to have shifted between the characters, either in relationships or in what characters know about themselves or each other. And then I piece that together. It's kind of like having that plan. It's like a child who knows where their boundaries are, and once they know that there are boundaries and where they are, they have the freedom to play. And I'm kind of like that if though that plan gives me the parameters within which I can play, it's not so tight that there's no play allowed, because I think that well, it's no fun for a start. And I also think it ends up showing itself in the writing as well, that it can be sort of quite staid. But a child with no boundaries either, feels completely out of control, or feels completely stymied, that they can't do anything because they don't know what's allowed. So I spend quite a bit of time creating the context within which I feel sort of most creatively active, if that makes sense. So there might be days as well when I just don't have the time to spend doing that. There might be days where I'm completely absorbed in something else going on in my life. And so it might be that I will pick up a different kind of task. It might be that all I can do is just tidy my desk so that it feels more organized for, when I can come back to it. Or I've always got a list of things to do, or more research that I need to do. So there might be something specific that I need to find out about. For example, right now on my list is I need to find out more about the wool prices in Australia in the 1980s. So that is something I can do, that doesn't take the mental and emotional bandwidth that I need in order to create new words. But I also find that, the best words come to me when I'm not sitting at my desk. So, I might spend days thinking about a particular chapter or a particular scene and hear the words in my head, going round and round. And I might come to my notes later and find that I've written the same sentence exactly the same way 5 different times. And I sort of think, well, okay, that's something that's definitely landed. But, and I hear dialogue in my head as well. So it's always pen and paper that I reach for to write. Again, it feels more tactile. It's my handwriting. I can think and write faster with pen and paper than I can on a screen. So, that then becomes part of what I use when I sit down. It's kind of like an assembly job, a construction job. Here are the pieces. Now, how are they going to fit together? And is there anything that is interesting and beautiful that I can create from it?
So, yeah, there's a lot going on and a lot of moving parts there. On a day when you are getting down new words, is there an aim for that? Are you saying, okay, I'm feeling like I've got the time and I'm in the right headspace, I'm going to try and get 1,000 words? What are you working towards?
I don't work in word count. I just find that it doesn't particularly help me to do that. I mean, it might be interesting, but it's not particularly useful. I think much more in chunks, like, a chapter or a scene. It's how much ground I want to cover. I want to get to the end of this bit. And I do tend to have, I might have a plan for, say a month, how much ground I want to cover in a month, and then divide that up. And I can sort of assess whether I'm sort of on track or not on track, and whether I can create more space to help move things along. So it's very much in terms of how much ground to cover, how much of the plot, how many chapters, rather than how many words.
It sounds like it is quite all-encompassing. So on a day when you have been writing, getting new stuff down, how good are you at switching off afterwards? When you have to stop and you have to get on with the rest of your day, is there much of a decompression needed?
Oh, I'm hopeless. I will allow, I do allow time between sort of finishing one section and starting the next, because I find that having written something, that actually ideas start to gel and coalesce better if I just stew on it for a bit and let it percolate. And often it's after I've written something that I will be scribbling lots more notes about that chapter, and then revisiting it and incorporating that and rewriting as well. Sometimes I sort of, if it feels really urgent and that it's going to be helpful, I will sort of rewrite rather than move forward. Sometimes I will just paperclip all the notes that I'm amassing, to what I've already done, and decide to come back to that later.
Okay, as you have now, as your debut is out, when that, and then you move on and you're writing new things and there's new book deals and this is what you're doing, how much pressure do you feel under to have to write regardless of how you're feeling, to curate at the time, to make a space that you need to get your words down all the time? Does that kind of creep into your thoughts at all?
Well, I do consider it my job, and, a job means there's work to do. I think it's interesting that, as a writer, to a large extent, you're in charge of how you do that. and so that I can be flexible around what kinds of tasks I need to do and, what availability I've got to do them. But I think I'm pretty good at being honest with myself about whether I'm not feeling like doing it because I'm trying to do the wrong task, that I'm trying to write something when I haven't developed enough ideas about what I want to say first, or whether I don't want to do it just because it's hard. And it is hard. I think that, the gathering notes and ideas, and especially at the stage where, you haven't made a lot of decisions yet, that, the possibilities are laid out before you. There's a certain bit that's kind of uncomfortable there where you're sort of relinquishing control and you're yielding to the uncertainty of what it might be. But that's enormously fun as well, because you're just gathering any snippet of ideas that come to you. But the actual putting it together to, crafting a chapter, sentences and paragraphs, I find that quite a struggle. I think for me, it's an act of courage that you have to full on face the fear that, the words won't come to you, or the words that come to you might be rubbish or not at all adequately convey what you want them to. And I think, there is a huge element of just trusting that you build layers, that what you have will grow. It grows in substance, it grows in gravitas, it grows in layers. And, there are things that, will really interest me that I can add to that. So I know that it's happened before, and I just trust that it will happen again as long as I keep putting the work in to make it happen. But I think you do have to have a certain kind of work ethic to be a writer. I mean, there probably are people who sit down and the words flow and they absolutely love it. But a lot of that part of it for me does feel like a struggle that, I'm editing between my head and my hand as I'm writing, so that, an idea comes and I think, no, that's rubbish. No, that's a cliche. That's really lazy. And so I can sort of look at a blank page for quite a long period of time until I get into it.
There'll be more from Kate in just a sec. This week's episode of Writer's Routine is sponsored by Ingram Spark, who help you self-publish like a pro. Also by the QuickBook Reviews podcast. You can find links to both of those who are supporting the show this week, wherever you're listening. And remember, in the future, you can sponsor the show yourself. If you've got a book, a project, some creative endeavour, which definitely deserves more people to know about it, well, let me do the shouting for you. If you support our Patreon page, there is a way that you can sponsor this show. All you need to do is get to patreon.com/writers routine. You can sponsor us there. You can also support the show and get some merch, behind the scenes content, and access to our writing community over on the Patreon page. Whatever you can send my way goes an extraordinarily long way. That's if you'd like to be a monthly backer. You can always make it a one-off. Absolutely fine. Whatever you can give really does help the show keep going. You could do that on our Ko-Fi page. You can send a tip my way, ko-fi.com/writers routine. Links for both of those are in the episode notes where you're listening. Let's get back to it then with Kate Kemp chatting about her brand new novel, The Grapevine, how it all came from a manuscript that won her a prize too. You can hear about preparing yourself for disappointment, also about her winding path to publication, and we pick things up talking about getting rid of words and whether Kate has reconciled herself to the fact that she might end up writing down the wrong path for a little while.
I don't mind the cutting at all. In fact, I think that's just part of crafting a good story, is cutting away the bits that don't need to be there. So yeah, I'm absolutely fine with that. You know, I'm grateful to those bits for what they taught me along the way. Um, and I'm fine with, you know, the extent to which it feels difficult. Maybe it won't always feel so difficult. I don't know. But I think that's part of, for me, it's part of caring about, um, you know, of all the ways that I can say what I want to say in a book, or of all the ways that I can, you know, cover a certain amount of ground in a scene, you know, what feels like the best way, and what ways have I got available to me. And that's really useful. I also, you know, there are little tricks that I use as well. A couple of years ago, I took up knitting. I had a thyroid illness that I was quite jittery and, you know, really anxious and agitated. And I started knitting as a way of just having something for my hands to keep on doing. And I've become quite obsessed that there's something about the movement of my hands that frees up space in my brain to think. So often, you know, I will be writing, and if I come to something that's tricky, I'll just knit a few rows and just let my mind work. You know, I don't know if there's anything about, you know, accessing different parts of your brain, if your hands are working in conjunction, you know, something along the lines of kinesthetic learning, about how movement can help. I think it would be really cool if it was true that something like that happened, because it feels like it does for me, that there is some kind of movement. And in fact, I always edit by moving at the same time. I pace as I read aloud when I edit, and pay attention to my breath and, you know, the pace and the rhythm of my gait. And I'm thinking about whether it sounds like it's my voice telling a mate a story and how that would flow. And I think sort of using movement in conjunction with that really, really helps.
I want to talk about the kind of winding process that got the Grapevine out there, because this started as a manuscript which won a prize, didn't it? And that has led to it being out. So can you just run us through where it came from and the process that's led to this publication?
Okay, so as an incomplete manuscript, it won two prizes. One was the Yeovil Literary Prize, and the next one was the Stylist Prize for Feminist Fiction. And that was the prize that got me my agent. And Nell Andrew was an agent that I had right at the top of my list already. And so it was a prize that she ran in conjunction with Stylist magazine. And so when I won that, I was absolutely elated. It felt like, because I knew that I wanted writing fiction to be my job, and I knew that they were really high stakes, that the odds were completely stacked against me in making that happen. So it was an extraordinary moment when I won that, because it felt like getting everything I wanted. It felt like having both arrived at a destination as well as embarking on something completely new. But I was also terrified because I didn't yet know if I had it in me to complete a whole novel. I hadn't done that yet. But I quickly learned that I absolutely loved working with Nell, and having somebody to say, you know, when do you think you can get me the rest, was really helpful. And it just meant having a much more professional approach to doing the work. And, you know, if it wasn't for Nell, I don't know if I would still be tinkering around with that manuscript. I mean, she was the one who said, you know, we're ready to send it out. And I was like, oh, I was thinking we're at the stage of, are we heading in the right direction still? But, maybe I'm somebody who would endlessly keep fiddling around with it. But yeah, so she sent it out on submission and it had a wonderful reception, and I have absolutely loved the process. And I think it really helped that, even before winning the Stylist Prize, I was very clear with myself about what it was I wanted, specifically about being a writer. And the first thing was that I wanted a professional identity again. I wanted to see it as my job and be paid for it. And the other thing I wanted was to have professional relationships with people who I felt stimulated me intellectually and creatively. And, that's exactly what I've got in my agent and my editor and the wider team, so much more than I could ever have expected. And I think, the process of being published is an extraordinary one, because as an author, you've kind of got one toe in the publishing industry, which is really nice because you don't feel swallowed up by it. And you can sort of ask questions about how things work that might, sometimes be tricky to ask. But at the same time, you're not, fully ensconced in the industry. And it can sometimes feel like the whole process is, playing a game of keepy-uppy with your emotions. That, in the same day, there can be brilliant news about, a real boon, something unexpected that is absolutely delightful. And then another day that, something that was on the cards has fallen through. And I have found it really useful to rethink how I deal with disappointment. And I've discovered that no matter how successful you are as a writer, there are disappointments, built into the process along the way, because your team is always pitching for things that, some of which come good and some of which fall through. And I've learned not to fear disappointment. I think it's a really useful way of finding out what the things are that really matter to you. I think it's a good way of finding out what things you really want to be ambitious for and what things just, don't make that much difference. I think it's a really good way of connecting with other people, because, somebody who gets absolutely everything that they want, where's the interest in that? It's I just think that's a little bit dull. Exciting, but also there's not much to really tease apart and learn from that. So yeah, I have to say I've absolutely loved it. I've loved the people that I've got to work with. I've loved seeing a project through to completion. The Grapevine is out now in Australia and New Zealand, and it's going to be published next month on the 13th in the UK. So it's done. It's finding its way out into the world, and there's lots of publicity, things like this, which is great. I love this because I really enjoy having a chat, but at the same time, I'm very mindful that my job is to write, so I need to keep writing and keep my feet on the ground by returning to the practice of writing. And so even on days that are really busy, I'm still wanting to do something that is related to the second book.
And And that is it for this week's episode of Writer's Routine with Kate Kemp. The novel is The Grapevine. You can get a copy right now. Use the link for our bookshop.org page wherever you're listening. We'll be back next week with a brand new guest on the podcast. If you haven't, do check out the Sebastian Folkes episode from last week, fully visualised on our YouTube channel. You can support us on Patreon and Ko-Fi too. And you can get in contact with the show at writersroutine.com. And I'll see you next week with a brand new guest. Until then, enjoy yourself.